My name is Abby. I was 19 years old at the time, living in a small town near Sacramento, California. I once thought I was a lucky daughter, blessed with a complete family, at least in the eyes of our neighbors and relatives. But it turned out the only thing they truly cared about was the image we projected to the world. And I, in just one night, became the thorn that scratched through that polished surface. It all started with a video that spread online. A private video, recorded during spring break the year before, when I was foolish enough to trust the person I called my boyfriend, Dylan. I had firmly broken up with him after discovering his betrayal. I didn't know that Dylan still kept that video, and I never imagined he would use it for revenge by humiliating me in front of the entire town. The first message came early in the morning, before I was fully awake. A classmate sent it to me along with the words, "Abby, are you okay?" Then came a flood of other messages, all filled with hidden meanings. When I finally opened my laptop, my face went pale. Images, laughter, my privacy torn apart and spreading like wildfire through dry grass. I could hardly breathe. But the worst part wasn't the stares and whispers outside. It was how my family reacted. The first one to find the video wasn't me. It was my sister, Jenna. She sent it straight to my father, along with a chillingly brief line. "You need to do something before this ruins our family's reputation." When I got home that afternoon, everything had changed. The front door lock had been replaced. One of my old, worn-out bags lay abandoned on the porch. My mother, Sharon, stood behind the curtain, her gaze as cold as if she had never given birth to me. Not a single question, "Are you okay?" Only heavy silence. The kind of silence that told me they had erased me from the family. My father, Gregory, wouldn't open the door. When I pounded on it and called for him, he just stood inside, his voice sharp as it echoed out. "You brought this shame on yourself, Abby. We didn't raise a daughter to become a laughingstock." I froze. My chest ached as if a hand were squeezing it tight. I wanted to scream that I was the victim, that I was the one betrayed and hurt. But I knew it was pointless. Their minds were made up. I sat down on the porch steps, the sunset sliding down the roof, casting its light on that worn bag like a cool reminder of our severed ties. Inside the bag were a few old clothes, a pair of sneakers with worn soles, and a journal I used to hide under my pillow. That night, I snuck into the backyard, trying to climb through the window of my old room, the same window I used to sneak out of as a kid. The room was unchanged, only colder, emptier. I sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, and, with trembling hands, opened the journal. I began to write, my words broken like my breathing. "I'm sorry for disappointing everyone. I don't know how to fix this. I just hope." I stopped. My vision blurred, my hand shook. I looked at the page and realized it was meaningless. What was there to apologize for, when I was the one who had been hurt? I tore out the page and set it on fire with my lighter. The small flame licked at the paper's edge, its faint light flickering against the walls of the room I used to call mine. I stood up, walked toward the window, and glanced back one last time. Night had fallen over the small town, the streetlights in the distance glimmering like lighthouses that I knew were no longer meant for me. I clutched my bag tightly and walked away without looking back. I wandered through the cold night of Sacramento, clutching that worn bag to my chest. The familiar city felt like a foreign land now. Every street corner, every streetlight made me feel lost. That night I slept in the car of an old friend, the only one who pitied me enough to give me shelter. But after just 3 days, his patience wore thin. "Abby, I don't want any trouble. You understand, right?" His voice faltered, avoiding my eyes. I understood. I had nothing left to hold on to. On the 4th day, I caught an interstate bus, leaving town behind. I didn't know exactly where I was going, just as far as possible. The old bus rattled down endless highways, leaving behind the place I once called home. I leaned my head against the window, my breath fogging the cold glass. Outside, the dark night swallowed the distant mountains. and I felt like it was swallowing me, too. Denver greeted me with a bitterly cold winter night. I stepped off at the bus station, my thin coat no match for the wind that cut through my skin like a blade. I had no one there, no place to stay. A spot beneath a bridge near the station became where I curled up for the night. That night, as I huddled beneath a thin blanket I found in a donation bin, a soft sob echoed through the dark. I lifted my head, straining to see. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was all alone, her face dirty, tears in her eyes as she looked around in panic. I stepped out from my hiding spot, slowly approaching her, my voice gentle. "Sweetie, where's your mom? Why are you here alone?" She trembled, said nothing, clutching a torn teddy bear. I knelt down and held out my hand. "I'll help you find your mom, okay?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. I walked with her down the empty street, asking other homeless folks along the way, and finally found her mom, a young woman, frantic, running along the sidewalk searching for her child. The moment they embraced, I stepped back, my throat tight. I had saved someone, even just a little. And in that moment, I reminded myself, I couldn't give up. The next morning, I chopped off my long hair in the bathroom of a gas station. Locks of hair fell onto the cold tile floor like pieces of the old abbey. I stared into the mirror, seeing a face so unfamiliar that I froze. I went to a community center and signed up with a new name, Abigail R., keeping just the first letter of my old last name, enough to remind myself never to forget the bitter lesson. The days that followed were a stretch of time where I struggled to survive. I applied to work as a waitress at a small diner tucked away in an old residential neighborhood. My hands grew used to the weight of heavy plates, to the constant rush of orders, to the forced smile I wore as I accepted meager tips. At noon, I took on cleaning work at a small clinic. The smell of antiseptic clung to my clothes, following me all the way back to the cheap rented room in a crumbling building with peeling walls. At night, I hunched over an old keyboard, entering data for a logistics company whose office location I didn't even know. Each night, as the city fell asleep, I sat on my worn bed, flipping through scraps of paper where I had written my goals. Survive, learn, become someone they never imagined. Once, while cleaning the clinic, I found a thin book on immigration law someone had left behind. I brought it home, devouring every page like a thirsty person finding water. The more I read, the more it felt like I had opened a new door. I began to realize that the law, the thing that once made me feel trapped, could also be what helped me save myself. I was no longer the Abby I used to be. I became invisible in this big city, but step by step, I knew I was quietly redrawing my life. One early winter evening, as I had just finished my cleaning shift at the clinic, cold wind howled through the cracks in the doors, cutting into my skin like thin blades. I walked briskly down the empty street toward my shabby rented room. Suddenly, a hurried voice called out from a small alley across the street. "Please, don't take my son, please." I stopped. In the dim light under the street lamp, I saw a small woman, her hands trembling as she clutched a boy about 6 years old. In front of her were 2 men in plain clothes, one of them holding a stack of papers, his voice tense. "Sign this. The form's valid. If not, they'll come take both of you tomorrow." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. I wasn't anyone important, but in that moment, I couldn't walk away. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. One man glared at me, annoyed. "None of your business. Leave." But the woman looked at me with pleading eyes that I couldn't ignore. I reached for the stack of papers and quickly scanned them. There were clunky legal terms, but I realized this was a voluntary deportation consent form, not any valid order. I took a deep breath. "You don't have to sign this. It's not mandatory. And if you two don't leave, I'll call the police." The 2 men were speechless. One of them cursed, then dragged his partner away. The woman burst into tears, hugging her son tightly. Thank you. I just nodded. my heart still shaking with fear. But I knew I had done the right thing. 3 days later, while I was wiping down chairs in the waiting room, a man knocked on the clinic door. He wore a long gray coat, holding a folder. "Are you Abigail R.?" He smiled, handing me a business card. "I'm Marcus Ellis, director of a nonprofit supporting immigrant communities, Liberty Bridge. We heard about how you helped that mother avoid signing deportation papers. We're looking for someone to assist with paperwork. Are you interested?" I hesitated, unsure what to say, but he continued. "No experience required. We just need someone with a conscience." The job started with small tasks: making coffee, photocopying files, delivering documents to court. I didn't complain. Every day I learned a little more. By day, I ran errands. By night, I sat in my old room, watching immigration law lectures on my laptop, downloading materials to read. Each time I saw a family smile as they received a temporary residence permit, warmth spread through me. I was no longer invisible in the crowded streets. I was beginning to rebuild myself from pieces I once thought were shattered. One late afternoon, as I was organizing files, Marcus walked in. "Abby, a local paper wants to interview you. They heard about how you helped Maria and her son." I froze. My heart clenched. "No, I don't want attention. I just want to help." Marcus looked at me with kind eyes. "I understand. When you're ready, just say the word." I breathed a sigh of relief. Time passed. From running errands, I moved on to compiling documents, then drafting outlines for community workshops. Every night, I kept studying. I enrolled in an online short course on law, quietly building my knowledge. Then one day, as I stood giving a presentation at a small community center workshop, looking into attentive faces, I realized I couldn't keep hiding. I was no longer the girl running away. And when the Denver Chronicle approached me again, I nodded, but I only allowed them to write AR, Community Advocate. Since the day I became an immigration policy advisor for the city of Denver, my life took a completely new path. The meeting rooms that once intimidated me became places where I spoke up with confidence. I became the one at the negotiating table, making proposals, helping to shape policies. Every meeting, every report I wrote was an effort to prove that someone once rejected could still do good. I learned to use precise words, to present data to defend my arguments. At night, I stayed up late under the desk lamp, poring over immigration law, scribbling notes in the margins of books and documents. I clearly remember one snowy morning when my phone rang insistently. It was a call from a colleague reporting that a Honduran family we had once helped was facing an improper deportation order. I didn't even grab my coat. I rushed straight to the shelter. The little girl in that family was about 9 years old. When she heard that they could stay while their case was reviewed, she burst into tears, ran up, and hugged me tight. "You're my hero." I bent down and hugged her. Warmth filled me despite the bitter cold of that morning. And I knew I was on the right path. News about me started appearing in local papers. At first, I kept refusing to appear on camera. I was afraid my face would be recognized, that my past would be brought up. But then I realized, if I kept hiding, my voice would never be loud enough to protect those who needed it. I agreed to interviews but insisted they only print Abby R. Immigration Policy Advisor. No portraits, no sensational headlines. Gradually, I stopped fearing the camera lens. I appeared at hearings, answered interviews, and spoke at symposiums on immigration and human rights. I didn't talk about myself. I spoke about the people who quietly contributed to building the community, about the children who only dreamed of going to school without fearing separation from their families. One autumn day, Marcus, the man who had once given me my first chance, met me at a small cafe near City Hall. He looked at me with that rare look of unwavering trust. "Abby, you've done more than we ever expected. It's time for you to take one more step. You should run for office." I felt rooted to the spot. Run for office? Marcus, I'm not a politician. He smiled and shook his head. You don't have to be a politician. You just need to be yourself. And you can make real change. After many sleepless nights, I decided to run for governor of Colorado. I knew I wasn't wealthy, I had no powerful backers, but I had one thing: the trust of those I had helped. My campaign was simple: no frills, no empty promises. On the posters, I included just one line: well, let actions speak louder than words. I went to every town, every neighborhood, shook every hand, listened to their stories. I didn't talk about my past. I only spoke about the future we could build together. On election night, the small hall where I chose to gather wasn't grand. It was just a community center in Denver, with warm yellow lights and old wooden chairs. The results appeared. ABR, governor of Colorado. Applause roared like waves. I stepped up to the podium, heart full of gratitude. I looked down at the crowd, the faces that had journeyed with me, and silently vowed. This path wasn't just for me, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed. I was sitting in my office, the afternoon light streaming through the wide glass window, when my assistant's voice interrupted my thoughts. Abby, you should see this. On the large screen mounted in the corner of the room, the news ticker scrolled. Savannah R., Texas State Prosecutor, faces allegations of evidence tampering. I sat still. Savannah, my sister by blood, the one who had secretly sent my private video to our father, pushing me into a pit of despair. And now, she was facing the very legal storm I had once trembled to avoid. Details appeared. She was accused of falsifying evidence in an immigration case, where a single mother was at risk of unlawful deportation. The media called it Texas's political earthquake. I stared at the screen, feeling no surge of hatred, only as if fate was mocking us with a strange loop. 3 days later, I appeared at Savannah's preliminary hearing in Austin. I came quietly, without announcement. I bought a commercial ticket, traveled alone, wore a long gray coat and dark sunglasses. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and onlookers. I quietly chose a seat in the last row, hidden behind a large pillar. But nothing could hide my presence. Once a familiar gaze met mine. The judge entered, her eyes sweeping the room before pausing. She froze briefly, adjusted her glasses, and frowned. Excuse me, is that Governor Abby R.? The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Heads turned. Cameras and phones were raised. Savannah spun around, eyes wide in shock, her lips moving but no words coming out. In the front row, my parents sat like statues. My father, Gregory, looked at me as if he had seen a ghost from the past. My mother, Sharon, clutched her worn rosary tight, her eyes filled with tears. I sat up straight, neither nodding nor bowing. I wasn't there to save, nor to judge. I only came to witness. Just hours later, social media was flooded with headlines. Governor Abby R. makes surprise appearance at sister's trial. A woman once abandoned by family now silently bears witness to the truth. And then the real storm hit. A tabloid blog dug up the old video I thought had long been forgotten. They posted a blurry screenshot from the clip, unmistakable despite the haze. I sat in my office, the screen flashing with messages from the communications team. An assistant called, voice panicked. We need a response immediately. We can sue. We can demand a takedown. Do you want to issue a statement? I shook my head. No, let them look. I'm not afraid anymore. My phone rang, the caller my father. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was still as cold as in the old days. Are you using the family to polish your image? That's enough. I closed my eyes for a moment, then replied, voice calm. I've carried this name longer than the time you ever stood up for me. If you don't feel ashamed, I have no reason left to bear it. The long beep echoed as he hung up. That night, I looked out the window at Austin's city lights. My reflection on the glass was no longer the frightened girl who once ran away. I only saw a woman facing the past in peace. Below, news crews kept their cameras ready, waiting for me to appear. But I didn't need the lens to prove anything. I had already let my actions speak. A message from my mother appeared on my phone screen one evening after I had finished a meeting with the Legislative Council. "Abby, come home for dinner with the family. We need to talk." "Please." I stared at the words, my finger hovering over the screen. After more than 10 years, it was the first time she had reached out to me like that. Before I could respond, another message arrived from my father. "Abby, you owe the family a conversation. Come." I knew they weren't calling me back out of affection. I knew exactly why. Savannah. And this time, they had no choice but to turn to the daughter they had once pushed out the door. On Friday night, I returned to the house in the suburbs of Austin. The place that was once a home, but in my memory was only a place of coldness. The house was just as it had been, the white fence freshly painted, the garden neatly trimmed, everything tidy as if that order could somehow cover up all the cracks inside. My mother opened the door, her face showing clear exhaustion, dark circles beneath her eyes from sleepless nights. She tried to force a weak smile. "Abby, you're home." My father stood behind her, adjusting his tie, looking more like he was preparing for a negotiation than for a family dinner. Savannah was already at the dining table, visibly thinner, her eyes lowered as she saw me enter. Dinner had been carefully prepared. A long table covered with a white cloth, porcelain plates and crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier's light. The scent of enchiladas and cornbread filled the room, but no one touched their food. No one was in the mood to enjoy it. My eyes happened to stop at the wall across from me. A painting hung neatly there, the one I had painted at 16, a Texas country landscape with a brilliant evening sky. But the bottom right corner, where I had once signed my name in clumsy handwriting, had been covered with a small piece of cream-colored fabric, so skillfully placed that anyone who didn't know would think it was part of the design. I stared at it for a long time. My heart tightened, not with anger, but with a deep sadness. My father began, "Abby, we don't need to drag this out. You know why you're here tonight. Savannah made a mistake, but she's still your sister. Could you use your voice, say something to the prosecution, or at least help her get a chance to explain?" My mother grabbed my hand, her eyes pleading. "Sweetheart, please. You're the family's only hope right now. Just one word from you." Savannah looked up, her lips trembling. "Abby, I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything, but I have no one else." I set down my knife and fork, the sound of metal on porcelain ringing out in the silent room. I looked at each of them in turn, my voice slow and clear. "If tonight I weren't Governor Abby R., would you still see me as family?" The table fell silent. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking with each beat. I got to my feet, gently sliding the chair back. It creaked softly, like the house itself was sighing. I took in the painting one last time and offered a faint smile. I kept the R, to remind myself where I once fell. "But I rebuilt this life without needing any of you." My mother burst into tears, her voice breaking. "Abby, please, don't leave us now." I turned away, stepping out of that house. The night wind swept through the front yard, the scent of freshly cut grass drifting to my nose, reminding me that sometimes freedom is simply letting go of what once held us down. The car door closed, shutting out the voices calling from the house behind me. I started the engine, glancing in the rearview mirror. That house looked so small in the dark night, just like the weight of the past no longer had any hold on me. And I drove away without looking back. After leaving my parents' old house that night, what I carried with me was a single resolve: to do something so that people like me would no longer be forced into silence by threats from their own family. The next morning, I held an emergency meeting with my policy advisory team. In that modest room, filled with papers and drafts, I spoke, my voice firm. "We will not let silence be the condition for love or respect. I want a bill, no, 2 bills, to protect the voices of those who have been bound by family in the past. And so the Justice Witness Protection Bill and the Public Kinship Act were born, drafted in the sleepless nights that followed. 3 weeks later, at a press conference in the Colorado state capitol, I stepped up to the podium. No banners, no flashy slogans. I began, "For years, we've seen people threatened, slandered, and retaliated against by their own families for speaking out. I used to think this was just my personal story, but it's not. This is the pain of far too many, and today, we will not let it continue." I introduced 2 bills before the press, lawmakers, and community representatives. The Justice Witness Protection Bill would criminalize acts of using family ties to threaten, coerce, or slander whistleblowers. The Public Kinship Act would allow public servants, officials, and those in public service to report family ties that could cause conflicts of interest, without fear of being labeled as betraying their family. Reporters fired off questions. One asked, "Aren't you afraid people will say you're turning a personal issue into politics?" I smiled and answered firmly, "I don't write laws for me. I write them for those who've had to choose between the truth and survival." News spread across newspapers everywhere. From local papers to national TV channels, the name Abby R. was mentioned, but this time not tied to any scandal or unearthed past, but to a bold political move. Public debate ignited. Some gave full support. Some were skeptical. On social media, thousands shared stories of being threatened by family, of being forced into silence in the name of family. My office received hundreds of letters and emails from all over the United States. One letter I still keep by my desk, handwritten on yellowing paper. "Governor Abby, I'm Harold Bennett, someone who opposed you when you ran for office. I once thought you were destroying family values, but today, thanks to your bill, my daughter, who spoke out against her ex-husband's wrongdoing, is protected by the law. I was wrong. Thank you for doing what people like me never had the courage to do." I read that letter over and over. Each time, I believed more deeply that the path I chose, though lonely, was the right one. The state legislature began reviewing the 2 bills. Hearings stretched on, debates grew tense. I was present at every session, not avoiding anything. I shared real stories, cited words from victims who had written to me, and even spoke of my own story, but without bitterness, only truth. One afternoon after a hearing, as I left the Capitol building, a middle-aged man approached me. He wore a security uniform, holding his cap in hand. "Thank you, Governor. My daughter was once too scared to speak up about her husband's abuse. Now she's stronger because of what you've done." I gripped his hand tightly, saying nothing more, but feeling a strange peace well up inside. On the day the bill passed the State House, I stood looking out the window, seeing the sky outside unusually clear. I knew this was just the beginning, but at least I had laid the first stone in building a wall to protect people like me. That late afternoon, my office was quieter than usual. Outside the window, the soft autumn sunlight bathed the rooftops of Denver, casting a golden hue over the familiar street corner. I was reviewing the draft amendment for the Public Kinship Act when my assistant knocked softly, her voice low. "Governor, someone's here, no appointment. Savannah. She says she just wants to see you privately." I looked up, my finger pausing on the file. A brief silence. Then I nodded. "Send her in." The door opened. Savannah walked in, no longer the sharp prosecutor from the courtroom. Before me was a woman with a pale face, dark circles under her eyes, and an exhausted look. She wore an old sweater, her hair hastily tied back, her hands twisting together nonstop. She quietly took the seat across from me, drew a deep breath, and spoke. "Ever?" I don't know where to start, but I want to speak from my heart. I didn't answer, just waited quietly. Savannah looked up at me, her voice breaking. "I used to be jealous of you. Jealous of the freedom you had that I didn't dare claim. Jealous that you dared to live honestly. So when I had the chance to push you away, I didn't hesitate. Now, when I look back, I was the one who was truly lost." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm not asking you to save me. I know I don't deserve that. I just want you to know that this time I truly regret it. I sat there looking at Savannah, no hatred left in me. What needed to be said, I had said long ago. I simply said softly, "You couldn't destroy me, Savannah. You just forgot I existed." And when someone is forgotten long enough, they learn how not to be forgotten anymore. She lowered her head, saying nothing more. When Savannah stood and left, I didn't see her out. There was no need for forced hugs or belated goodbyes between us. A week later, I attended a community gathering at a small activity center in the southern part of Denver. No cameras, no journalists, no grand banners. Just rows of neatly arranged plastic chairs, a long table covered with a simple white cloth, and about 40 local residents. I wore a light blue shirt, plain jeans, my hair tied back neatly. I rolled up my sleeves, helped set up chairs, poured water, arranged snacks on plates. A boy about 10 years old ran past, almost knocking over a water jug. I gently steadied his hand and smiled. "It's okay, kiddo." No one called me governor. No one looked at me with admiration or curiosity. I liked that quietness. When the gathering began, I sat among the crowd, listening as people shared about the community's issues, housing, education, healthcare. At the end, as everyone slowly made their way out, I saw my father, Gregory, standing at the back of the room, among the crowd, holding an old hat, his face older than I remembered. He wasn't dressed in a fine suit like always, just a dark, faded shirt. He waited until everyone had left before stepping closer, his voice low. "I didn't understand you before. I thought you were just a stubborn daughter, ruining the family's name. But today, seeing you sit there, doing what I never dared to do, I get it now. You've done what I never had the courage to do." My eyes met his, and I felt a strange peace. No resentment, no sorrow. I simply replied softly, "I just did what I believed was right." He said nothing more. We stood there for a brief moment, then he turned away, his slow steps the walk of a man weary of himself. A light rain began to fall as I stepped outside. I lifted my head, letting the rain soak my hair and shirt. No longer did I feel like the child who once huddled under the eaves. What remained was a woman who had learned to stand tall, without needing attention or titles, just herself. And I knew that was the greatest victory. My story wasn't a journey to seek forgiveness from others, but a journey to forgive myself and stand steady on my own 2 feet. I had learned to let go of the expectations of those who once turned their backs, to focus on building something more meaningful, a life that is honest, useful, and doesn't need validation to feel worthy. Now, looking back, I know I am no longer bound by the past. I don't need to be seen to know that I am doing right and living right. What do you think about Abby's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel to catch more meaningful stories about life, family, and resilience.